Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at marriage and family customs from different cultures around the world.
Sounds fascinating.
It really is. We've got some amazing research articles and even some cross-cultural databases to dig into.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we're going to uncover some really surprising stuff.
I bet. I mean, when most people think about marriage, they probably picture like a traditional wedding.
Right, exactly, like a bride and groom exchanging vows.
Yeah. But from an anthropological perspective, marriage can be so much broader than that.
Oh, absolutely. So how would anthropologists actually define marriage then?
Well, they see it as a socially recognized union,
Okay.
but that union can take many forms.
Right. I too.
It doesn't always have to be between a man and a woman.
Right.
It could involve multiple spouses.
Ah.
It could even be same-sex unions.
Mhm.
And we see all of this variety both in historical and in contemporary societies.
That's really interesting. So it's not just the Western traditional view of marriage.
No, not at all.
In fact, I was reading in one of the articles about arranged marriages,
Yes.
which are still pretty common in some parts of Asia and Africa.
Uh-huh.
But that seems like such a foreign concept compared to the emphasis on romantic love that we see in Western cultures.
Right.
So what leads to these really different approaches when it comes to choosing a life partner?
Well, it really comes down to the roles of individual choice versus societal expectations.
Okay.
So in arranged marriages, families usually play a really big part in choosing partners.
Okay.
They look at things like social status, economic compatibility, and family alliances.
So it's more than just the two individuals coming together.
Exactly. It's much broader than that.
It's like two families uniting.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially when family ties are so strong and really impact social and economic life.
Right.
But what about love? I mean, do these arranged marriages ever develop into those kinds of loving relationships?
Well, even though arranged marriages may not start with romantic love, they can and often do develop into very strong and loving partnerships over time.
Oh, wow.
And remember, love itself is really complex and it's shaped by cultural norms.
That's a good point.
So in many cultures, they might see companionship, respect, and shared values
Yeah,
as being just as important as passionate love.
that's so interesting. So it's not really about one being better than the other,
Exactly.
but different cultures prioritize different things for a successful marriage.
Precisely.
And it seems like the economics of marriage play a big part in many cultures, too.
Absolutely.
The source material mentions bride price being a common practice.
Yes.
So what exactly is bride price, and what does it mean for the families involved?
Well, bride price, sometimes called bride wealth, is basically a transfer of wealth from the groom's family to the bride's family as part of the marriage agreement.
Okay.
It's most common in societies where women have a really big role in things like agriculture or where patrilical residence is the norm,
Patrilical resident.
meaning the wife moves in with the husband's family.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I can see how that would make sense,
Mhm.
especially in agricultural societies.
Right.
Like the bride's family is being compensated for the loss of her labor.
Yeah, basically.
But could bride price ever cause, conflicts or tension between families?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Negotiating the bride price can be very tricky and sometimes lead to argument.
I can imagine.
Yeah, like if they disagree on the amount or what form the payment should be in,
Uh-huh.
this can cause delays in the marriage
Oh,
or
wow.
strain relationships between the families or even cause the whole marriage agreement to fall apart.
Wow.
So it's a custom that's really deeply rooted in tradition and economic reality.
It's not just about love and marriage.
It's much more than that.
There's this whole network of social and economic negotiations.
Right.
It impacts the couple and their entire families.
Exactly.
And speaking of family, the sources also mention some interesting traditions around remarriage.
Yes.
Specifically, the levirate and the sororate.
Uh-huh.
Can you explain those to us?
Sure. These customs are really interesting because they show how marriage is seen as a bond
Okay.
that goes beyond the two people involved.
Interesting.
So in the levirate, if a man dies,
Uh-huh.
his brother is expected to marry the widow,
Oh, wow.
and the sororate is the opposite.
Okay.
If the wife dies, her sister is expected to marry the widower.
So it's all about keeping those family alliances going.
Yes, it's about maintaining those family connections and also ensuring social and economic stability.
Even after death.
Exactly.
Wow. Are these practices common in many cultures?
They're mostly found in unilineal societies where descent is traced through either the mother or the father's line.
Okay.
So these remarriage obligations help keep family connections and property within that lineage.
it's remarkable how these traditions reflect the value of family obligations in shaping those social structures.
Yeah.
And we can't forget about polygamy,
Right.
which is another marriage custom that kind of challenges Western assumptions.
Yes, it does.
You mentioned earlier that polygyny,
Mm-hmm.
one man with multiple wives,
Yes,
is actually more common than monogamy in a lot of cultures.
it is.
So why is that?
There are a few theories that try to explain why polygyny is so common.
Okay.
Some researchers think it's economic factors, especially in societies where women contribute a lot to like agricultural work or other subsistence activities. Having multiple wives could actually increase a man's economic productivity and improve his standing in the community.
Oh, I see.
Then there's the shortage of men theory, which suggests that polygyny may have developed in societies with high male mortality rates.
Due to warfare.
Right, due to warfare or other factors.
Well, I also came across something called the pathogen stress theory
Yes,
that connects polygyny to places with lots of infectious diseases.
right.
How does that one work?
Well, the pathogen stress theory says that marrying multiple women, but specifically unrelated women, might actually have some reproductive advantages because it increases the genetic diversity of their children,
Interesting.
which could then lead to better disease resistance.
That's fascinating. So there's this whole interplay of social and economic and even evolutionary factors
Exactly.
that have shaped how common polygyny is in different cultures.
And it's important to keep in mind that these are just theories.
Right.
The actual reasons behind polygyny are complex, and they probably vary from culture to culture.
Yeah, it's a topic that keeps anthropologists busy, for sure.
Oh, definitely.
Trying to understand all the different human mating strategies.
Mm-hmm.
It really makes you rethink everything you thought you knew about marriage.
It does.
Now, what about polyandry?
Yeah.
One woman with multiple husbands.
Yeah.
Is that as common as polygyny?
It's much rarer than polygyny.
Okay.
But it does exist in some cultures,
Like where?
particularly in parts of Asia,
Okay.
like Tibet and Nepal.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I remember reading about fraternal polyandry in Nepal, where brothers share a wife.
Right.
Why would a culture develop a practice like that?
Well, fraternal polyandry is often connected to economics,
Okay.
particularly in environments where resources are scarce.
Ah.
So by sharing a wife, the brothers can avoid dividing up their land and resources,
Yeah.
which allows them to maintain a higher standard of living.
It's just amazing how different cultures adapt their marriage customs
Yeah.
to fit their own social and economic situations.
It really is.
But it's not just about the number of spouses involved, right?
Right.
Family structure also varies widely across cultures.
Absolutely.
And so far, we've mostly been talking about marriage from the perspective of the couple.
Yeah.
But marriage is also the foundation for family life.
It is.
And just like marriage,
Yes.
the idea of family can take many different forms,
Absolutely. In Western cultures, we usually think of the nuclear family as the standard.
like parents and their kids.
Right.
But in many other parts of the world, extended families are much more common.
That's right.
So that means multiple generations or even different branches of a family live together, or at least very close to each other.
Yes.
And they kind of form this bigger social and economic unit.
They do.
I imagine that having an extended family like that offers a lot of support,
Uh-huh.
especially when it comes to raising children and sharing resources.
Absolutely.
But are there any downsides to that kind of family structure?
Of course, just like any family structure, there can be challenges.
Like what?
Well, in extended families, conflicts can arise over decision-making or how resources are allocated, or even just navigating all the different personalities and expectations.
Right.
But often those challenges are handled within the extended family itself,
Okay.
maybe with elders or respected family members taking on the role of mediator.
So it's not just about who's related by blood.
Yeah.
It's really about the social and cultural norms that shape how the family interacts as a whole.
Exactly. It really makes you appreciate how much we take our own cultural assumptions about family for granted.
It does. Another aspect of family life that differs across cultures is the concept of inheritance.
Right.
In some societies, inheritance is strictly patrilineal, meaning wealth and property are passed down through the male line.
Yes.
In others, it's matrilineal.
So it flows through the female line.
Exactly. It makes me wonder if there are any cultures where inheritance is more adaptable,
Uh-huh.
maybe based on an individual's merit or the specific needs of family members.
That's a great point. There are some societies that practice bilateral inheritance.
Okay.
So both sons and daughters inherit equally.
And in some cultures, inheritance isn't so much about material possessions.
Right.
It's more about passing down knowledge or skills or social status.
That's right. It's fascinating how these different approaches to inheritance reflect different values and priorities.
Some cultures might focus on accumulating wealth for future generations,
Yes.
while others might focus on continuing the family lineage or creating a sense of shared responsibility.
Exactly.
It's such a complex issue.
It is.
And it has social and economic implications.
Absolutely. The way inheritance works can have a huge impact on family dynamics, gender roles, and even how a society develops economically.
It's something that anthropologists are still studying.
They are.
To understand how different cultures manage wealth and power across generations.
Yeah. It's really interesting. And speaking of cultural diversity, the idea of kinship also plays a big part in how we define family.
Right.
We have aunts, uncles, cousins, and even close friends who we consider like family.
Exactly.
So how do different cultures view these extended kinship networks?
Well, kinship systems are super complicated and vary a lot.
They do.
But they're essential in shaping social organization and identity in many cultures.
Right.
Some societies have really detailed kinship terms.
Yes.
With different names for different types of cousins and aunts and uncles, which reflects this really intricate web of relationships within a community.
It does.
I remember reading about a culture where they distinguish between cross cousins and parallel cousins.
Yes.
Can you explain that to our listeners?
Sure. You're thinking about the distinction between cross cousins and parallel cousins.
Right.
Which is something you see in societies with unilineal descent.
Okay.
Whether it's patrilineal or matrilineal, it's all tied to rules about marriage and exogamy.
Which dictate who you're allowed to marry.
Exactly. So in some cultures, marrying a cross cousin is preferred or even required.
And a cross cousin is someone related through a parent of the opposite sex.
Right. Okay.
Whereas marrying a parallel cousin might be forbidden.
And that's someone related through a parent of the same sex.
Correct.
So these kinship systems aren't just about tracing ancestry.
Never not.
They're a guide for how to navigate social relationships, marriage alliances, even inheritance patterns.
Exactly.
It's like a whole secret language of social organization.
I like that. That's a great way to put it. Kinship is woven into so many parts of social life.
In many cultures, it shapes who you can marry, who you can rely on for help, and how you inherit property or status.
It makes you realize that we often assume our way of doing things is the natural or universal way.
It's easy to do.
When in reality, there's so many different family structures and kinship systems out there.
It's true. It's easy to get caught up in our own cultural perspectives.
It is.
But when you look at the bigger picture of human experience, it challenges our assumptions and gives us a whole new understanding of human relationships.
So true. If we step back for a minute and look at the bigger picture,
Yes.
what does all this diversity in marriage and family customs tell us about humanity?
That's a great question.
What are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, I think it tells us that humans are incredibly adaptable
Uh-huh.
and creative in how we form social bonds,
Right.
how we raise our children, and how we deal with the complexities of life.
There's no one right way to do things.
No, there isn't.
And what works in one culture might not work in another.
Exactly. And it highlights how important it is to understand and respect those different cultural perspectives.
Especially as our world becomes more interconnected.
It is.
You're right. In a world where people from different cultures are constantly interacting, it's more important than ever to be aware of and sensitive to all the diverse ways families exist.
Absolutely.
And the different values and beliefs that shape them.
Yes. So to our listeners, what are your thoughts so far?
Are there any customs or traditions we've talked about that you find especially surprising or interesting?
I think what's really fascinating is how these different ways of looking at marriage and family show us that cultures have different values and priorities.
That's true.
For example, some cultures really focus on strong family ties and social stability, while others might put more emphasis on individual choice and personal fulfillment.
That's a great point. It makes you wonder how those different cultural perspectives on family actually play out.
Right.
In a world where people from all different backgrounds are coming together to form relationships and families.
It's an important question, and it leads us to a topic that's becoming more and more relevant in our globalized world: intercultural families.
Right.
These are families where the partners come from different cultural backgrounds.
Yeah.
So they each bring their own unique traditions, values, and perspectives.
It's like a microcosm of global integration,
It is.
where all the challenges of cultural exchange are happening within a family.
Exactly.
I can imagine it must be both difficult and very rewarding to navigate all those differences.
It is.
What are some of the common challenges that intercultural families face?
Well, you have two people who've been raised with different beliefs about pretty much everything.
Right.
From gender roles and family obligations to how to raise children and religious practices.
Yeah.
And these differences can cause misunderstandings.
Of course.
Conflicts and tension within the family.
It makes sense that communication is key in those situations.
It is absolutely crucial.
But how do you even start to bridge those gaps when the differences seem so big?
It's not just about talking. It's about really listening.
Okay.
Having empathy and being willing to see things from the other person's point of view.
That's important.
It's about recognizing that there isn't one right way to do things. And that both partners bring valuable perspectives to the relationship.
It's about finding a balance,
It's
a way to respect both cultures
Yes.
while creating something new and unique to their family.
Exactly.
It sounds like a real balancing act.
It is. But it's also incredibly enriching. Intercultural families have this chance to learn from each other,
Yeah.
to broaden their horizons, and to create a family culture that blends the best of both worlds.
I bet there are some amazing stories out there
Oh, I'm sure there are.
about intercultural families facing these challenges and finding ways to blend their traditions.
Absolutely.
What are some ways these families find common ground and build a shared family identity?
One common way is to focus on values they both share.
Okay.
Even though couples come from different backgrounds,
Right.
they often have core values in common, like love, respect, honesty, and wanting to create a happy, healthy family.
Those shared values can be like a foundation
Yes, they can.
for building a strong relationship
Uh-huh.
and making decisions together.
It's about finding those common threads that connect us as human beings, regardless of our culture.
And another important aspect is being willing to compromise.
Right. It's unrealistic to expect one partner to completely abandon their traditions.
And adopt the other person's.
Exactly.
It's about finding ways to include elements of both cultures into their family life.
Yes.
Whether it's celebrating holidays from both cultures,
Yes.
or blending food traditions, or finding ways to honor both family lines.
Exactly.
So intercultural families aren't just adapting to each other's cultures.
No.
They're actively shaping new cultural expressions.
Yeah.
And creating this richer, more diverse social fabric.
That's exactly what's so exciting about studying intercultural families.
Right.
They're at the forefront of cultural evolution.
Huh.
They're showing us that culture isn't static.
It's dynamic.
Exactly. It's always evolving, especially within these close family relationships.
It reminds us that diversity isn't just something to tolerate.
Right.
It's something to celebrate.
Yeah.
It's a source of strength and creativity and resilience.
Absolutely.
Not just for families, but for society as a whole.
Well said.
Intercultural families are leading the way to a more inclusive and understanding world,
They are.
showing us that love, respect, and a willingness to learn from each other can bridge even the biggest cultural divides.
It's very true. So as we wrap up our deep dive into these amazing marriage and family customs around the world,
Yes.
what's the most important takeaway for our listeners?
Well, I think it's this.
Okay.
The human experience of family is incredibly diverse,
Yes,
beautifully complex, and constantly evolving.
it is.
There's no one right way to be a family.
That's right.
And what matters most is the love, the respect, and the commitment that binds people together,
Yes,
no matter their cultural background.
I agree. Whether you come from a family that's been part of one culture for generations,
Uh-huh.
or you're part of a blend of cultures, remember to embrace the diversity, cherish the traditions, and keep those conversations going.
Absolutely. It's through understanding and appreciating our differences that we can build a more connected and compassionate world.
Well said. It's been great exploring these topics with you today.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of marriage and family customs.
Yes, thank you.
Until next time, keep those minds curious and those hearts open.
Great advice. It's really fascinating how cultures adapt their marriage customs to suit their own. So, the number of spouses, right? The way families are structured also varies a lot across cultures.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, so far we've been mainly talking about marriage from the perspective of the couple. But marriage is also the foundation for family life.
It is.
And just like marriage, the concept of family, can look very different depending on where you are in the world.
Absolutely. In Western cultures, we tend to think of the nuclear family as the norm.
Right, parents and their children.
Exactly. But in many other parts of the world, extended families are much more common.
So that means multiple generations, or even different branches of a family living together or very close to each other.
Yes.
And forming a larger social and economic unit.
Exactly.
I imagine that having that kind of extended family network offers a lot of support.
It does.
Especially when it comes to things like raising children and sharing resources.
Absolutely.
But are there any potential downsides to that kind of family structure?
Of course, every family structure comes with its own challenges.
Like what kinds of challenges?
Well, in extended families, you might see conflicts over decision-making, or how resources are shared, or even just navigating all those different personalities and expectations.
Right, so many people to coordinate with.
Exactly. But those challenges are often addressed within the extended family structure itself.
Okay, so they work it out amongst themselves.
Yes, often with elders or respected family members acting as mediators.
So it's not just about blood ties. It's about the social and cultural norms that shape how families function.
Exactly. It really makes you realize how much we take our own cultural assumptions about family for granted.
It does. Another aspect of family life that varies a lot from culture to culture is the idea of inheritance.
Right?
Like in some societies, inheritance is strictly patrilineal.
Meaning that wealth and property are passed down through the male line.
Exactly. And in others, it's matrilineal, so it flows through the female line.
Yes.
So you wonder if there are any cultures where inheritance is more flexible, maybe based on individual merit or the specific needs of each family member.
That's a great question, and you're right to point that out. There are societies that practice bilateral inheritance.
Okay.
So both sons and daughters inherit equally.
Oh, interesting.
And in some cultures, inheritance is less about material possessions and more about passing down knowledge, skills, or social status.
It's amazing how these different approaches to inheritance reflect different values and priorities.
They do.
Some cultures might prioritize accumulating wealth for future generations, while others might focus on the continuation of the family lineage or fostering shared responsibility within the family unit.
Exactly. It's a very complex issue.
It is.
With significant social and economic implications.
Absolutely. And the way inheritance works can really impact family dynamics, gender roles, and even a society's economic development.
Right. It's a topic anthropologists continue to study to understand how cultures manage wealth and power across generations.
It's fascinating stuff. And speaking of cultural diversity, the concept of kinship also plays a big part in defining family, doesn't it?
It does.
We have aunts, uncles, cousins, and even close friends that we consider family.
Right, like chosen family.
Exactly. So how do different cultures navigate these extended kinship networks? Kinship systems can be incredibly complex and varied.
I bet.
But they're essential in shaping social organization and identity in many cultures.
Right.
Some societies have very specific kinship terminologies with distinct terms for different types of cousins, aunts, and uncles.
Okay.
Which shows just how intricate those relationships are within their communities.
Wow. Yeah, I remember reading about a culture where they distinguish between cross cousins and parallel cousins.
Yes, that's a distinction you see in societies with unilineal descent, whether it's patrilineal or matrilineal.
Right.
It all ties into the rules of marriage and exogamy.
So who you're allowed to marry.
Exactly. In some cultures, marrying a cross cousin is preferred or even required.
And a cross cousin is someone related through a parent of the opposite sex.
That's right. Okay.
Whereas marrying a parallel cousin might be considered taboo.
And that's someone related through a parent of the same sex.
Exactly.
So these kinship systems aren't just about tracing your ancestry.
No, they're not. They're like a roadmap for navigating social relationships, marriage alliances, and even inheritance patterns.
That's a great way to put it. Kinship is embedded in so many aspects of social life in different cultures.
It's like a whole hidden language of social organization.
It is. It shapes who you can marry, who you can rely on for support, and how you inherit property or social status.
This makes me realize how often we just assume that our way of doing things is the natural or universal way.
Right. It's easy to do.
When in reality, there is this incredible diversity of family structures and kinship systems across cultures.
It's true. It's easy to get caught up in our own cultural perspectives.
It is.
But when you take a step back and consider the broader spectrum of human experience, it challenges those assumptions and opens up a whole new understanding of human relationships and social organization.
I agree. So if we zoom out for a moment and look at the bigger picture, what does all this diversity in marriage and family customs tell us about humanity?
That's a big question.
What are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, I think it shows us that humans are incredibly adaptable and creative when it comes to forming social bonds, raising children, and dealing with all the ups and downs of life.
Right, there's no one right way to do things.
Exactly, and what works in one culture might not work in another.
Yeah, and it highlights how important it is to understand and respect these different cultural perspectives.
It is, especially as our world becomes increasingly interconnected.
That's right. In a globalized world where people from all different cultures are constantly interacting, it's more important than ever to be aware of and sensitive to all the different ways families exist.
It is.
And the values and beliefs that shape them.
Yes. So, to our listeners, what has stood out to you so far?
Are there any customs or traditions we've talked about that you find particularly surprising or intriguing?
I think what I find most fascinating is how these different approaches to marriage and family really reflect diverse values and priorities. Like, for example, in some cultures, the focus is on maintaining those strong family ties and social stability. While in other cultures, individual choice and personal fulfillment might be given more importance.
It makes you wonder how those different cultural perspectives on family actually play out.
Right.
In a world where people from such diverse backgrounds are increasingly coming together to form relationships and families.
That's a great question. And it leads us to a topic that's becoming more and more relevant in our globalized world: intercultural families.
Right.
These are families where the partners come from different cultural backgrounds, bringing with them their own unique traditions, values, and perspectives.
It's like a microcosm of global integration.
It is.
Where all the complexities of cultural exchange are playing out in this very personal sphere of family life.
Exactly.
I can imagine it must be both challenging and incredibly rewarding to navigate all those differences.
Yeah. It really is fascinating to think about all the different marriage and family customs we've talked about today.
It is. From arranged marriages to polygamy, from extended families to these complex kinship systems.
Right.
It's clear there's no single right way to approach these really fundamental parts of human society.
And that's really a testament to how adaptable humans are and the power of culture to shape our beliefs and practices.
Exactly. And as we become more interconnected, these diverse perspectives are going to keep intersecting and interacting in ways we probably can't even imagine.
It's true.
And that brings us back to intercultural families, which we touched on earlier.
Yeah.
These are families where the partners come from different cultural backgrounds.
Right.
Each bringing their own unique set of traditions, values, and perspectives.
It's like a mini version of global integration happening right there in the family.
Exactly, where all the complexities of cultural exchange are playing out in a very personal and intimate way.
It is.
I can only imagine that navigating all those differences must be really challenging, but also incredibly rewarding.
It is.
So what are some of the common challenges that intercultural families often face?
Well, just think about it. You have two people who grew up with completely different ideas about pretty much everything.
Yeah.
From gender roles and family obligations to how to raise kids and religious practices.
And these differences can easily lead to misunderstandings, conflicts, and tensions within the family.
Absolutely.
It seems like communication would be key in those situations.
It is absolutely essential.
But how do you even begin to bridge those cultural gaps when the differences seem so huge?
You're right. Communication is so important. But it's not just about talking to each other. It's about actively listening. Trying to empathize and see things from your partner's perspective.
Right.
Recognizing that there's no one right way to do things.
Yeah.
And remembering that both partners bring valuable ideas to the relationship.
So it's all about finding that balance.
Yes.
A way to honor both cultures while also building something new and unique to their own family. It sounds like a delicate dance.
It is a delicate dance, but it's also incredibly enriching. Intercultural families have this amazing opportunity to learn and grow from each other.
Broaden their perspectives.
Exactly. And to create a family culture that blends the best of both worlds.
I bet there are so many incredible stories out there about intercultural families figuring this out.
Oh, I'm sure there are.
Overcoming these challenges and creating these beautiful blended traditions.
Absolutely.
So how do these families actually find that common ground and build a shared family identity?
Well, one way is to focus on the values they have in common.
Okay.
Even though couples come from different backgrounds, they often share core values like
Right.
love, respect, honesty, and a desire to build a happy, healthy family.
Right.
And those shared values can be a really strong foundation for building their relationship and making decisions together.
Yeah, it makes sense to start with that common ground.
It does. And another key part is being willing to compromise.
Okay.
It wouldn't be fair to expect one partner to completely give up their own traditions.
And adopt their partners.
Right. It's more about finding ways to incorporate aspects of both cultures into their family life.
Like how?
Maybe celebrating certain holidays from each culture, or blending food traditions, or finding creative ways to honor both family lines.
So intercultural families aren't just adapting to each other's cultures. They're actively creating new cultural expressions.
They are.
And making the social fabric even richer and more diverse.
That's exactly what's so fascinating about intercultural families.
Yeah.
They're at the forefront of this cultural evolution, showing us that culture isn't fixed. It's always changing and adapting, especially within these close relationships.
Right. It's like a reminder that diversity isn't something we should just tolerate. It's something to celebrate.
Absolutely.
It's a source of strength and creativity and resilience.
And not just for families, but for our whole society.
Intercultural families are paving the way for a more inclusive and understanding world.
They really are.
Showing us that love, respect, and a willingness to learn can bridge even the biggest cultural divides.
That's so true. So as we wrap up this deep dive into all these fascinating marriage and family customs across cultures, what's the most important takeaway for our listeners today?
I think the big takeaway is this.
Okay.
The way humans experience family is so incredibly diverse, so beautifully complex and constantly changing.
It really is.
There's no one right way to be a family.
Then what truly matters
Is the love, the respect, and the commitment that bring people together no matter their background.
Beautifully said. Whether you come from a family that's been rooted in one culture for generations or you're part of a vibrant mix of cultures.
Right.
Remember to embrace that diversity.
Cherish the traditions.
And keep those conversations going.
Because it's through understanding and appreciating our differences that we can truly build a more connected and compassionate world.
I couldn't agree more. It's been such a pleasure exploring all of these fascinating topics with you today.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of marriage and family customs across cultures.
Yes. Thank you all for listening.
We'll see you next time. So until then, keep those minds curious and those hearts open.